Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. The ETC is ongoing right now as we speak. This is a battle report on one of the practice games that I played with a friend of mine, with a team member of mine actually. So it's an Empire of Sunstyle versus Vermin Swarm matchup. We have my list. We have my opponent's list. I will do a video later about my list to discuss it a bit more in depth. My opponent has Vermin Swarm. He has a Ruinous Dictator, some infantry blocks, and then all kinds of support weapons, to be honest. So with that, let's get into the game. We are playing Hold the Center with Frontline Clash, so it's quite an easy game to get started. It's the first round scenario deployment combination also of the ETC, I believe. I'm at top, my opponent is in bottom. Generally, this is, in my view, not the best matchup for my army, because Vermin Swarm is still quite good at deleting armor, especially with the 3 units of canister launchers, and also this Ruinous Dictator is a big problem for me. So the Ruinous Dictator, I think you can... It's a bit of a choice that polarizes your army. If your opponent doesn't have any ranged damage output that you can pressure onto him, then it's going to be a tough matchup for your opponent. If the opponent has multiple cannons and stuff, then well, it's going to be quite easy to delete the Ruinous Dictator, and then after that, most of the army usually flees away. How I go into this game, so I have my 2 heavy infantry blocks, which are going to be quite important to keep my knights safe, because my knights, they have a knight commander in them, so they count as a parent unit, so my support units can perform a counter charge. Otherwise, the Knights of the Sun Griffin, they will do enough damage normally to stay in combat in 1 versus 1 fights. However, the supporting pieces of my opponent also mean that he will grind them down from range damage over the turns. So that is not that ideal. We're playing Hold the Ground. I was kind of hoping for my opponent to drop for first turn, which is why I didn't drop, because Hold the Ground I prefer to play second turn, so you can... well, there's 2 options basically. Either you can push forward, go on the objective and bait your opponent out, or you can react to your opponent, where you can just put the amount of scoring units in the scoring zone that you need to fulfill the requirement of having more scoring than your opponent. So that is the way that I usually prefer to play, giving my opponent the initiative in Hold the Ground. But then again, it's also kind of matchup dependent. I could have gone onto the objective with 2 units of Knights of the Sun Griffin in the first turn. However, then I do have to weather the entire trial and terror storm of my opponent, and I'm not too keen on that. Also, my opponent has his Secrets of the Doomblade on his Black Fur Veterans, so that's the big block in the middle. I can still run through the units in a bit, just to make it a bit more clear for you guys. So he has this Secrets of the Doomblade on his Black Furs, and that is still quite a problem for the reliability of my Knight of the Sun Griffin. Because if he manages to push through 2 wounds, it's gonna quite easily just delete 2 of my chickens, and then I will definitely break from combat, because I cannot get back from that kind of combat res. So just a rundown of my opponent's units from left to right. He has a Doomspark all the way on the flank, then he has a Arena Beast, another Arena Beast. He has 3 canister launchers between the hill and the first Arena Beast. Then he has some Vermin Legionnaires, the Black Fur Veterans that he has cast a spell on now. Canister launchers to the back of them. Then he has the Fetish Brutes, Ignifiers with his Mage, Ruinous Dictator, then another Doomspark, Vermin Legionnaires, and another unit of canister launchers. So his first turn he shoots with the unit of canister launchers on the right. So deployment wise, these canister launchers are also quite important to me. I really want to stay away with my knights from his canister launchers. So this is also why I did the debating game of deploying 1 by 1, because I really wanted to know where his canister launchers would be before I put down my knights. I'm trying to put down some pressure on my opponent by advancing in places where I think I can. And so these Knights of the Sun Griffin in the middle, they are a little bit in a tricky spot because my opponent has advanced up to the circle. He has an advance of 5. So basically, if I stand where I start, he has a charge on something like a 7 or an 8. I can move backwards, then I basically give my opponent the objective because I cannot really advance after that. Or I would have to circle around quite far. So what I choose to do is to go into a position where his Black Fur veterans cannot see my Knights of the Sun Griffin. This does push me closer to the Fetish Brutes and the Doomspark and the Vermin Legionnaires. However, I'm now giving him 3 charges. One of them has Swift Stride, the other 2 don't have Swift Stride, and they need something like a 7 or an 8, or a 6 or a 7 or so. So I was hoping for a 50% chance to fail one of these charges. Furthermore, I try to buff up the Knights of the Sun Griffin as much as I can, so I do get Word of Iron for a +1 armor, and I do get No Die Enemy for +2 offensive, defensive, and agility, so I strike quite fast. I have my BSB in my Knightly Orders, which prevents my opponent from getting his Devastating Charge +1 agility with the Mantle of Ulor. And I have, of course, my Arcane Engine to give them Distracting, so he's looking at quite a buffed up unit that he's going to hit with nearly anything on 5+ with a 1-up armor save and resilience 4. I would say that's quite chunky. The only downside is that I should do enough damage to counter the combat rest that my opponent can bring. So we do measure out the way that his units could move, and this means that it's all fits in basically, and yeah, he also makes the charges, and he manages to charge me with all 3 of these units. I'm mostly concerned about the Doomspark actually because it auto hits with AP3. I'm not that concerned about the Fetish Brutes because they're only AP2, so I go to a 3-up armor save, and the Vermin Legionnaires obviously will not do that much damage. The good thing I also thought about this is that the Black Furs, if my opponent would charge here, the Black Furs would be blocked, as you can see, so they are in a position where it's quite tricky for them to do anything meaningful for at least a couple of turns. Yeah, so this is how the game progresses. Then we go to his magic phase, and in his magic phase he tries, well, he has Deceptive Glamour, which is kind of interesting. He has the Wheel Turns, which is quite a useful spell at this point to cast on my Knights of the Sun Griffin, because then I will only wound on 4+ and only hit on 4+, whilst I would normally hit the fetishes on, no, the defensive 3. So I would hit on 3+, I think, and I would wound on 2+ on the Legionnaires and 4+ on the rest. So it makes a bit of a difference. It's also mostly the stomps on the Legionnaires that are now 4+ to wound. So I try with all my power to stop the Wheel Turns, and I don't manage to stop it. However, this unit of mine is going to strike first. I have 6 riders, +1 attack from the champion, so 7 + 9 attacks from the chickens. It's 16 attacks. Wheel Turns set you to hit roll of 4+ and a to wound roll of 4+. So that means that on average I would do 4 wounds with my attacks, and I still have 2 stomps, so that's going to be 5 wounds. Whilst my opponent, I would expect him to do a wound, maybe 2 wounds. He charged in, he has 3 ranks, 4 ranks from the Legion banner, and I have an equal amount of banners as him, so he would win by 5, disregarding any wounds. I do expect to do like 3 wounds more than him. I have minimized discipline because of No Die Enemy. That is actually why I cast it more that than anything else. So I was expecting to lose by like 2 or 3, and then make it basically, just to stick around, be able to reform, be able to countercharge, and then basically just mop up all the stuff that's in the center, because I have a countercharge available with the Knights of the Sun Griffin near the building. I have the Arcane Engine that can countercharge, and I have the Knightly Orders. So that would make short work, hopefully, of a lot of the stuff of my opponent. Unfortunately, Guys sometimes don't agree. Under the wheel turns, I don't manage to make a single wound instead of my predicted 5 wounds. My opponent does, I believe, 1 or 2 more wounds than I expected. So I actually lose by, I believe it was by 8. So I go to discipline 1, and that is a roll I cannot make anymore. Yeah, so that was tough. It was mostly tough because my opponent also gets the overruns. So the overrun into the heavy infantry, the overrun into the knightly orders that have already been diminished by just 1 unit of the canister launchers shooting, I believe. Yeah, this is going to be rough in this way. I did try to come back from this by charging in the Fetish Brutes with my other Knights of the Sun Griffin. This is mostly because in this case I can get the scenario if I break them. Well, they are not scoring any. I don't know if Fetish Brutes are scoring, but my Knights of the Sun Griffin are definitely scoring, so I can. If I break them, I will score the objective this turn because it's turn 2. And otherwise, I'll just try to grind down the Vermin Legionnaires, I think. This is, yeah, if you're playing against Vermin Swarm and you don't have a counter to the Ruinous Dictator, units of like 50 Vermin with Unstable is just, you can't shoot through them. It's just impossible. So, my Knights of the Sun Griffin on the left of the screen, they do manage to chase off his Arena Beast. I do 2 wounds or something, and then he's going to now rally on a 6, so I'm quite confident about that. I turn open my flank to the Doomspark because I figure that if the Doomspark wants to charge in, he can be my guest, because a Doomspark alone, I'd rather just have it in my flank engaged in combat rather than to try to circle around it and then fail basically to catch it. So I'm trying to just draw it in. The Arena Beast of my opponent is like 16 inches away from my Knights of the Sun Griffin, so on 3d6 that's a bet that I'm willing to take. On my right side, on the right side of the screen, I advance with my heavy infantry through the ruins, because they were in a place where it was more convenient to go through the ruins. Basically, I want to progress towards the Vermin Legionnaires, but I want to make it so that if he charges me, he has to take a bunch of dangerous terrain tests. Also, my opponent can play quite wide with this 18-inch bubble. However, the Vermin Legionnaires on that flank, he's not really going to want to go to that flank, I guess. So if he was going to charge me there, he's not going to be in range of his general, and then a lot of advantages go away. So with my heavy infantry, I could maybe still take the charge and hope that I don't break, and then I would have a counter charge with the State Militia, and the State Militia will actually murder these Vermin Legionnaires quite badly. My opponent decides that he needs to do something about the objective, so I have a scoring unit there. He doesn't. So he's trying to get his Vermin Legionnaires in there, and I obviously will try to get rid of those. And otherwise, he does charge in with the Doomspark. He does get his 16 with the Arena Beast, and then he can clip with his Black Fur Veterans, my Knightly Orders. And in the shooting phase, he can still shoot at my Knightly Orders. Meanwhile, the canister launchers have actually had quite a lot of bad luck, just completely annihilating themselves, with some support shooting from my side. And his Ruinous Dictator charges into the flank of my Knights of the Sun Griffin. They had some buff, they had Word of Iron on them, I believe. But the Ruinous Dictator has an inherent AP 4 or 5, and he has a halberd, so he goes to AP 5 or 6. There's still some aspects in the Vermin Swarm book that I don't really fully agree on, such as the AP on the weapon of the Ruinous Dictator. Yeah, so we are engaged in combat everywhere. My opponent can still shoot. I unfortunately cannot. So I was a bit sad about the fact that Doomspark was also quite efficient at grinding down my my heavy infantry, because if they had come loose, then I could have put him up for a counter charge against anything. And with one Arena Beast and the Doomspark, my opponent manages to just kill off my Knights of the Sun Griffin entirely. So this is not looking good. I think there was some matchups here that went a bit better for my opponent than I had expected. I don't know if my expectations were wrong, but I was after the first turn I was quite confident about the state of the board, and then basically everything went down. I'm still quite happy about my decision to keep the knights as far away from the canister launchers as possible, because every turn that they shoot at anything else than knights, it feels like it's a bit of a waste. Because on the Knights of the Sun Griffin they can only score 6 hits as a unit, I believe. And yeah, on the Knightly Orders they can just do a tons of damage. Yeah, so this is the state of the board. I do manage to just grind down the Vermin Legionnaires quite a bit. I don't really manage to do a lot to the Ruinous Dictator. I was wondering whether it would have been better to issue a duel or not, and I don't think it would have been better, because I would have gotten more attacks back. Because basically at that point it's mostly just about trying to get through that round of combat. Because my opponent still has a rank, has a gigantic model, so I'm not that fast, because he doesn't fly, so he doesn't have light troops. And yeah, he has a rank, he has a flank. Oh well, he doesn't have a rank, but he has a rank. He doesn't get a rank bonus, I mean. He has a rank, so he can break my run rank stat fast. He has a charge, he has a flank, he has a big flank. I only have a banner, so that's -3, besides all the wounds being done. And then, well, he does more wounds than I do. So that is quite an easy win for his Ruinous Dictator. In my turn, I actually sneakily managed to charge his Vermin Legionnaires in the rear with my 13 heavy infantry that I left. And I do manage to get an overrun onto the objective. So by now I will score the objective twice. My opponent's scoring units are locked in combat. I'm quite confident that I will have the objective for this game, so that's at least something, because I'm expecting that the rest of my list will just crumble, well, not crumble down, but just be ground down by all the rest of my opponent's models. It's a bit unfortunate that we get to the placement as is, because we still have a duel going on between my wizard and the champion of the Black Furs, I believe. Yeah, so in this duel I will get the attacks of my opponent's Black Fur veteran champion. He will get my attacks. So over 3 rounds I didn't manage to kill him with a total of 9 attacks over the 3 rounds, 4+2 hit, 3+2 wound. That was a bit of a bummer, I would say, because, well, now my opponent can charge in to the flank of my wizard on the Arcane Engine. He can overrun into my Knightly Orders, and because of the ongoing duel with my wizard against the Black Fur veteran champion, I cannot issue a duel to get the Ruinous Dictator out. So my opponent's Ruinous Dictator can just allocate all of his attacks against my BSB. And probably my BSB will not be too fond of that. Yeah, so this is just practically gonna be over. Also in this turn, my Knights of the Sun Griffin that just rallied got charged by the Arena Beast of my opponent that rallied like a couple of turns earlier. Yeah, this is basically just not looking good. My Arcane Engine Wizard, I believe he dies. My opponent gets an overrun. And I do stick in this combat for now, if I'm right, or I believe so. And then my opponent gets an overrun. We go for an extra combat round. And then in my turn, this all goes away, basically. So this is practically the end of the game. The objective is going to go to me, because my opponent doesn't have capacity anymore to get more tokens than me. So points-wise, I thought we were looking at a 16-4. if I'm right. So that's going to be a 13-7 due to the objective for my opponent. So a little bit of analysis. I think I played it well after my opponent put a lot of pressure on the objective. I think also my opponent did that quite well, just pushing up his units. I think he should have made sure that he had more line of sight around the hill, because the hill is really a defining factor in this map, especially with all the ground. So he could also have moved up on the hill. I don't think it would have been very bad for him, because he might not be steadfast after I do a lot of attacks. I don't know if he could have just made the Black Fur veterans be 5 wide instead of 7 wide as they were, and then he could have comfortably walked on the hill, I think. However, he will lose some damage output, obviously, if he does that. So I don't know if that would have been better or not. Generally, both of our lists work quite well, and yeah, it's with these ETC lists you get a bit more, or at least the lists that we play, you get a bit more into this field of you build something for specific purposes, and then sometimes your opponents have counters. So, for example, my list is very armor skewed. My opponent's list is very reliant on the dictator. And yeah, if you remove for me my armor, and if you remove from my opponent the dictator, it's going to be a good game. Yeah, so this is going to be the end of the game. I have 3 state militia left that my opponent will never seize. And yeah, it's a 13-7 to the Vermin Swarm.